As global supply chains evolve, nearshoring has emerged as a pivotal strategy for major economies like the European Union. Shifting focus from traditional manufacturing hubs like China to emerging markets in Africa and the Middle East. Countries such as Egypt are well positioned to become re-export hubs, taking advantage of their geographical proximity and improving infrastructure to facilitate trade with European markets. This shift has prompted major changes in export routes, highlighting the potential of these nations to tap into new opportunities and bolster their economies through enhanced export capabilities. As the landscape of global trade continues to transform, the ability of developing countries to effectively engage in nearshoring will be crucial for their integration into international and European markets. Investments for exports are crucial for these nations aiming to penetrate the European market, especially in light of non-tariff barriers and the EU's agreements on green exports. By aligning production practices with European standards and addressing logistical challenges, these countries can effectively substitute Chinese exports and cater to rising demand in Europe. Thus, this session aims to explore how developing nations can leverage nearshoring, among other strategies, to enhance competitiveness in the global supply chain.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're coming to the latter part of the day. I hope the energy is high and you can stay with us. I think we have a very interesting topic for this session on nearshoring. As we explained, I think today, as the global supply chains rewire, driven by the geopolitics and the economics of the world that we're living in, I think this possesses a huge opportunity for countries like Egypt to take to reposition itself and to benefit from these seismic changes that are happening in the global economy. We have a star-studded panel with us today. So actually their titles were introduced, but I'd like to do a more elaborate introduction because I think they are worth an extra few words. So we have Dr. Blanca with us here, Dr. Blanca Dodson. She's a PhD in international economics and finance from the University of Marseille, and she worked in the European Parliament before she joined the World Bank Group. And she's done a lot of work for the Center of Mediterranean Integration and on the UN Office for Project Services. She has 30 years experience in international development, and she authored and contributed to 5 books around Mediterranean integration and fiscal policy and public finance and poverty reduction. And we're very, very happy to have her with us. We also have Mr. Nikolais Zaimis. He's the Minister Counselor of the Head of the Trade and Science Enterprise Section in the European Union Delegation and a Senior Advisor on Trade and Sustainable Development. He joined the EC in 1995, and he's worked in many countries, including Washington, D.C. and Tokyo, particularly, again, on anti-subsidy policies and trade policies in general. And he was a practicing lawyer before he joined the EU. He's worked in the public sector for many years. And obviously, we have Mr. Mohammed Esim with us, who is the chairman of ExpoLink and CEO, one of the people, one of the pioneers of the export industry in Egypt, somebody that I think I worked with many years ago on export policy. He has a long experience, starting with the commercial attaché in the Ministry of Foreign Trade, and then being a leader in exporting textiles out of Egypt. And now he's diversified his business interest into multiple sectors. And he's the founder, one of the founders of one of the first private public opinion research centers in Egypt, Basira, and the chairman of the ExpoLink, the Egyptian Exporter Association, and he's the treasurer of ECS, which I proudly serve with him.
I'm not the treasurer, you are.
Sorry, the Secretary General.
I'm the secretary.
The Secretary General. And finally, we have Minister Khatib, who's not with us, but I think it is worth for our friends that don't know Mr. Khatib to actually know the profile of the gentleman. He's a non-executive board member at the CBE and was a member of the Sovereign Fund of Egypt, but previously he's a a manager in private equity. I think he started as a managing director, a managing partner of EFG Hermes Private Equity. And then he was the managing director of Carlyle in Egypt before he went to EBRD based out of London. He spent almost 10 years there, and he was managing a portfolio of $8 to $10 billion before he came back to Egypt, and he finally joined us as the minister as the Minister of Investment in Egypt. And what I would do is we will start with opening remarks on the topic. So Mr. Khatib had to travel last second. He wanted to have been with us, but he kindly recorded for us a few of his thoughts on the topic. So I will start with the minister's comments. So these are 9 minutes. Please bear with us, yeah. But I think they're very insightful. And then we're going to do an opening round of comments from the panelists with follow-up questions. And then we're going to open up to the floor to get questions from all of you. So thank you very much. Can we roll Mr. Khatib's comments?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Abla, ECS team, Dr. Ziad. My apologies for not being able to be with you today. I am in Brussels for a negotiation and meeting with the corresponding trade ministers in Brussels, which, again, an important topic for our trade ministry. To address the question in hand, I think any country, any developing economy needs to address few policies that investors would want to see. We need predictable, transparent, clear policies for the investors. In the case of Egypt, what we're trying to work together as an economic team is to have a clear monetary policy, fiscal policy, trade policy, and eventually an industrial policy. Investors would like to see, for example, a tax rate for the duration of the investments. They want to see stability in the policies. They want to make sure that the law will be applicable and applied across all segments of the investment society equally to that effect. What we're also working on in the case of Egypt, and as a developing country as well, is to make sure that we have a business environment that is conducive for business, that can really help us deal with the existing investors and make sure that the investors are actually having the right environment. Because in most of the studies we find that the local investors are actually the potential, almost 40% of the potential of the FDI that we anticipate. We also want to make sure that we attract FDI to the country to utilize Egypt as a hub for exports. And we utilize our location and the potential for the country to be a hub for exports and industry and industrial, in addition to other segments as well. In terms of the opportunity, in terms of where we see Egypt and some of the challenges as well to that effect, let me start with some of the challenges. Again, we're talking about trade. I think the trade policy in Egypt needs a lot of work. The fact that I want to see Egypt open for business, open for trade. We've looked at the situation in terms of our trade today between our exports and imports. I think we need to clearly say that we don't see an issue with our imports. It's an issue with our exports. Our exports are too tiny for the size of the economy, close to 10% of the GDP. Our imports, in terms of size, 20% of the GDP, and 83% of the imports are actually components for the industrialization or internal consumption, and some exports in the cases. So the reality of the matter, our focus will be to open trade, to make sure that the release of goods at the borders up to the international standards. Competition, we need to make sure that we're competing with several markets that are actually way cheaper, and in terms of time, they are actually way less in terms of the clearance in our time. So this is the areas, these are some of the areas that we see that we have deficiencies, and we already started convening the meetings with the relevant groups, and we have certain targets to address the time of clearance and the cost of clearing the goods in Egypt. And thirdly, I would like to improve Egypt's ranking in the trade, in the global trade competitiveness standards or maps. Some of the sectors and some of the opportunities we see very clearly. I mean, one, any labor-intensive industry Egypt is very competitive. Intermediate industries, engineering talents are quite abundant in Egypt, and I think we have the quality to build industries. We're seeing Egypt as a hub for some feeder industry for auto manufacture, for example, the wire harnessing business or wiring for the auto industry. We have 3 or 4 multinational companies that are actually dedicated fully for exports, the white goods industry, and many other industries that we see competitiveness. Again, I don't want to miss food industries, agro industries, of course, others that we find quite competitive. We have some challenges, and we know the challenges very well. We have a solution, and we started the implementation for some of those challenges. In terms of the opportunity, I think we have a great opportunity, and I think we need to capitalize on those opportunities as we speak. So I think Egypt's advantages are very clear today. It's our abundance of labor force, very competitive in terms of pricing vis-a-vis markets in the Mediterranean or the GCC in Europe. The labor cost in Egypt is around $200. If you compare that to Morocco, it's around $500. In Turkey, $1,600. In Europe, it's much more. And we have good quality labor force that is actually, with minor training, could be fit for a lot of the industries that we can attract. The second most important is that engineering talent, mid-management calibers is actually quite strong. Engineering talents are also very competitive in terms of pricing. And we're seeing industries that are actually localizing in Egypt and fully dedicated for the export market. Companies like Valeo, for example, the French company that is doing software for the auto industry that is exporting that service for the world. And many more of these companies that are localizing and finding Egypt as a hub for exports. Egypt location has always been on the agenda, but location without the proper infrastructure is not something that we could have said. Today, with the infrastructure that has been put over the past 10 years, we have a major advantage to utilize our location. What we've invested in infrastructure over the past 10 years is close to $500 billion. Last week, we've attended a presentation by the Minister of Transport and Industry, and he quoted 2 trillion Egyptian pounds of projects in the transport sector, spanning 7,000 kilometers of road, railways, public transport, high-speed rail. All of these are actually fundamental for the competitiveness in Egypt. When we talk about ports, the new ports that have been established, the expansion of these ports, the quality that we have put in terms of the connection between these infrastructure facilities and the industrial zones are actually something that is actually making Egypt very attractive to be a hub for export and industry in general. A third component of what we see as a major advantage is actually the trade agreement that Egypt have signed over the past several years. These trade agreements can open the market for the Egyptian companies or any company that can localize in Egypt to open markets in Africa, in the GCC, in Europe, in Latin America. These advantageous trade agreements are a real asset. And actually at the Trade Ministry today, we're actually trying to review these trade agreements, and we're trying to see how can we maximize the benefit of these agreements to the best of the country and to the best of our industry to that effect. So all of these components are actually positioning Egypt as a very, very attractive hub. But also we have one major advantage that we need to also position in the world that we're seeing today, which is the green aspect of things. Egypt's biggest wealth is actually our green potential, our renewable potential, our solar and wind potential, which really could be in the tens to 100 gigawatts of potential. This is not only for generation and the linkage to Europe and to Saudi that we're trying to work on, but actually eventually what we want to position this is actually that we can export green products. And that's the potential of Egypt. We see Egypt, if you combine all of these factors, the location, the labor force, the engineering, the trade agreements, and the renewable energy as real hub for green products for the future. I'm optimistic to see this, and we will try as a government, as a team, to make sure that we capture this opportunity, especially with the supply chain shift, with what we're seeing from an interest from Asia to Europe and to the Middle East to really come and build facilities in Egypt And that's our job, and that's our opportunity to capture. Thank you very much.
مش معانا. He's not here, but it's deserve.
We'll tell him that he got a good round of applause. So let me ask Dr. Blanca, please, to start with the opening remarks. If we can limit it to 5 minutes, it would be great.
Thank you so much, and especially I'm grateful to my friend Avla for this invitation, and congratulations to ECS for this amazing forum. The previous session was so spectacular. I hope we can maintain the same level in this one. So let me start by saying, before we address the topic of trade and investment, I'd like to start by saying that the recent macroeconomic reforms that Egypt have undertaken very hardly earned in a moment of tremendous geopolitical instability and many exogenous shocks deserve congratulations. I think Egypt is at a turning point because many of the reforms introduced, such as liberalizing the exchange rate to prevent abrupt devaluations in the future, or assuring that inflation is under control. This constitutes the first and most important signal for investors. It is necessary but not sufficient, but it must be the beginning. And this has been done. So Egypt is definitely at a turning point. Following the efforts to recover from COVID and despite all the geopolitical challenges that have disrupted trade and investment, Egypt has managed to reinforce its credibility vis-a-vis external partners and becoming a very important investment destination, as you can see, looking at the FDI inflows that have really increased very recently. Of course, this is only part of the story. We heard this morning, together with macroeconomic reforms, we must also watch at the structural side of the equation. And this is perhaps where additional reforms are already being undertaken, which are also of critical importance. Here, I like to mention the divestment program, which is geared towards creating a level playing field for private sector companies. On the one hand, this divestment program will also help with fiscal stability because it will lower the burden of the government and will help also to maintain the downward path to debt reduction. But more important, divestment is very, very critical for the emergence of a strong private sector that is capable of creating jobs and leveraging Egypt's capacity to diversify production and exports and therefore attract foreign investors and trade partners. There is no doubt, having said that, there is no doubt that Egypt has a much greater potential to integrate in the global value chain. Right now, it exports in relatively very small proportions, as the minister has just said, and it has the potential to diversify and consolidate itself as a regional trading hub. Diversification in the non-extractive sectors is needed, and for that, there are a number of barriers that should be removed. I will mention them quickly, and if you want, in the second part, we can go deeper into some of them. I think the first one is the non-tariff barriers that are as important as the tariff barriers to trade. And here I would single out two: the logistics and transport connectivity obstacles, including rail transportation, that must be removed. I know that Egypt is already developing several logistics centers and inland dry ports to alleviate constraints and promote an intermodal way of transportation while also decarbonizing. And I want to single out this project that I believe is being financed by the IFC to link the Alexandria seaport with the October 6th dry port in the Greater Cairo area. I think this will create an amazing railway pass that will reduce the traffic in trucks, which will be much, much better for efficiency of transportation, but also will allow to make great progress towards decarbonization. So this is just a very, very important example. It will also help with safety and certainly is going to attract many private sector operators. Other obstacles that must be removed have to do with technology to move up the value of the chain it's essential to introduce technology components, which, as we heard in several decisions, technology is moving so fast that no country can make progress and sustain positive GDP per capita rates of growth without adopting new technologies. And I believe now this is an area of new technology revolution. The industrial revolution is over. Now it's technology evolution. And this can come in many ways. Of course, every country needs to invest more in innovation and R&D, but I believe also that a lot of this technology may come through the FDI. When the inflows of foreign investment come to the country, the receptor country must make sure that those permeate to the rest of the economy, that create jobs and positive associations between the local companies and the big companies or multinationals that come to the country. There are other improvements, just two more, regarding regulations, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, the time needed to obtain construction processes and shop licenses, and other measures to improve competitiveness initiatives, especially around industrial zones. And finally, access to finance. I think it's very, very important. Promoting financial inclusion, including for women, and reducing the financing gap faced by small and medium-sized enterprises will be essential in Egypt, as it is, as a matter of fact, for all emerging markets. So maybe I will stop here, and in the second round, I can talk specifically more about what sectors and what products offer most potential for exports in Egypt.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Blanca. Nicolaus, can I ask you for your remarks?
Yes, thank you. First of all, good afternoon, everybody. And I want to thank also SS and Dr. Abla for inviting us, and send the best regards of Ambassador Christian Berger, who will be here with us. And I have to say, I've been here 2 years in Egypt, and I have learned a lot thanks to SS as well. There's some very good publications, and especially the business barometer. I have to say it's very important for us to know what the real businesses on the ground think about it. So with regards, I was quite impressed, I have to say, with the comments of the minister. I think he probably had a look at my notes, because I agree fully with what he said, except one thing at the end on trade agreements that will come back to it. So, but let me tell you about what is happening in the EU and how, we can help further investment in Egypt, and how we address the issue of nearshoring. So everybody has admitted, also in previous panel, that the trade landscape has changed substantially in the last years. It's because of wars, because of COVID, because of climate change. In my experience, when I was talking about trade, 10 years ago, it was a boring subject. Nobody wanted to talk about it. But now there's a lot of new elements, and these elements have to do with resilience, have to do with economic security, have to do with food security. So in the EU, businesses, they're looking at the picture, and they no longer look at supply chains as looking at the most cost efficient, the producing at the minimum cost, but at the most resilient one. And that's where the discussion on nearshoring or friendly shoring is coming. Now, I have to admit that this is not a term that we use in the EU. You will not find these terms, in our official documents. But you will see the message that it is addressed to our neighbors through this very important development, the appointment for the first time of a dedicated commissioner for the Mediterranean. So this is a new post. It has been attributed to Commissioner Suika, and she will be taking over, hopefully the 1st of December with the new commission. And it shows that Mediterranean and Egypt within the Mediterranean is a real priority. And I call on all of you to look at the letter, the mission letter that has been addressed. It's public, it's on the website, which really says, and I'm reading out again, she should be working with Mediterranean partners, building comprehensive partnerships focused on investment, economic stability, jobs, energy, transport, etc., scaling up and deepening trade and investment, creating the necessary conditions for a conducive business environment and investment climate towards a more integrated Euro-Mediterranean market. And also the mission letter to the new trade commissioner, who will be taking over, Mr. Šefčovič, it says clearly, you will lead on clean trade and investment partnerships, which is a new and very interesting concept. diversify our supply chains, and boost the economies of our partners. So it's not just diversify supply chains for the benefit just of European companies, but also we want to see the Mediterranean region grow economically, and especially with African partners to facilitate trade and promote sustainable investment. So this is the political messages that are coming from Brussels, and the minister right now, he's there. He's going to talk to commissioners. I hope they don't decide otherwise. We could have had this meeting tomorrow. I would have said more about it, but I'm sure he's actually passing the same messages. So, you know, what do investors really look after? You know, why should they come to Egypt? And it all comes down to a few key words, which is credibility, transparency, predictability, and legal certainty. You know, my background, I'm a lawyer. It's very tricky to ask lawyers to talk about economic subjects. We like legal certainty. We want to see documents. We want to see agreements with hard commitments. So Egypt has done, and it was very well explained, huge improvements in its physical infrastructure. But investors also want to see developments and modernization of the non-physical infrastructure. And that means a lot of the issues that we know the ministry and Gafi are working on, as the minister said, facilitating customs clearance, facilitating the business environment in terms of licensing, investment licensing. But it goes a bit further, wider, in terms of look at the intellectual property regime, looked at the enforcement of court judgments. So, you know, making the business environment easy, understandable, transparent to European investors. That is really key. So where do we have today? You know, what is the relationship? You know, those of you who, and I'm sure most of you know, we have upgraded our relationship to a strategic partnership. That was done in March. President von der Leyen was here, and with President Sisi, they upgraded the relationship, covering a number of issues, including trade and economy. And I have to say, strategic does have meaning. We have very few strategic partners. Egypt is the only one in Northern Africa, which basically means that we will be discussing the full agenda of our relationship, you know, with high-level summits every year or every 2 years. And we try to deliver on this. We had a big investment conference in June. I think a lot of you were there, where we brought over 600 European investors to meet with over 2,000 Egyptian companies and discuss opportunities in Egypt. Now, as I said, I'm a lawyer. I like agreements. And we have the association agreement, which is a legal document, which is really, there's good aspects and bad aspects. The good aspect is it was one of the very first bilateral agreements we entered, which shows the priority we were giving to our North African partners. But the bad news is it's very old. It covers only tariffs, covers only goods, and it has nothing to do with modern agreements. It's like using iPhone 1, while now we are in iPhone 15. So there's a lot more that is missing, a lot more that we can do.
Okay.
And we're asking the question, you know, and Egyptian businesses should ask themselves this question. Is this, you know, something that covers their needs? You know, is it really tariffs the problem with Europe? Or is it behind the border issues, as we just heard? Or is it about standards? It's about phytosanitary standards, about, you know, intellectual property issues in the EU. Is it about services? I fully agree with what the minister said about the human skills and the human capital in Egypt. So what not be able to offer these services in Europe? We just had in Europe an agreement with Canada, for example, to mutually recognize architectural profession. So now Canadian architects can come and work in Europe. So why not open the market to Egyptian architects to come? And why not open it to, you know, fintech? I will finish by saying that we very much hope now to engage with the new minister, new government. There are so many areas we can talk about and strengthen the relationship. And I will mention simply one, ITC. In the last 2 years, Egypt has gone through a lot of difficulties. We know in many sectors, you know, exports and sir, you will tell us about your area, have gone down with a couple of exceptions. One was agri-food, which was a really success story. And the other one was ITC. I was very impressed to see that the ITC sector in Egypt grew by 16%, reaching 6 billion. And a lot of this was about exports of services. So, and that's due to the human element, because their cost base is in EGP, on Egyptian pounds. But when they export, the revenue is in euros or in dollars. So that's an area, where we should really look at and see how we can exploit this, how we can open, the services market, ITC, the EU service market to Egyptian business. And at the second round, I will talk about also, if you allow me then, sustainable investment and some plans we have with Egypt.
Nicolas, thank you so much. Stresim, I'll ask you to give us your opening comments.
Thank you very much. And I thank the speakers that preceded me. The topic of our discussion today is nearshoring. But we have to understand where this is coming from, how this came about, the nearshoring, friendly shoring, all this reshoring thing. From my observation, what's happening now is coming from the geopolitical competition, basically. The West and the rest. The West thought globalization is bringing fruits to everyone. But after a few decades, maybe 3-4 decades of globalization, they realized that there is deindustrialization of Europe and the United States. The industry had moved east and settled in China, Korea, and other countries in the East. So that they realized that they are losing ground, and they have part of the rise of the right in Europe and in the United States is coming from this reason. So the West was thinking that by admitting China to the WTO and opening the markets, there will be richness in China, middle class, and then there will happen a democratization process in China. This was an illusion. It did not happen. So all their bets fell apart. So they started to retrack the globalization again. And we are seeing now a deglobalization. And as the globalization was led by the West, the deglobalization also is led by the West. The deglobalization started the process of re-engineering the global value chain. The global value chain has shifted from the West to the East. Now it is going to re-engineer, under this re-engineering came the terminology nearshoring that the EU does not recognize or does not use, but also friendly shoring, that they want countries that are friendly to the West to move the production there. And also some people like President Trump at one point in time was thinking of reshoring, inviting all the American multinationals to go back to produce in the United States. This process is really opened a window for countries like Egypt. And this is where the benefit of the reshoring. So I don't want to expand more at the opening remarks on this, and then we'll talk about how we can benefit from export and the investment and this in the coming round. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Esim. So I think for the second round, I think let's go from the more broader to the more granular, but let's try to be a little more prescriptive. So I think, Dr. Blanca, if you can double click into sectors, industries, products you think, again, we can create where we have opportunities that we can capture.
I actually have a slightly different view on what's happening with global value chains. I think that at least still 50% of the global trade still happening through global value chains. And it's true, it's been going downwards, and it happened even before the COVID-19. It started before. And this was aggravated by the Ukraine crisis. And yes, there is a movement towards regionalization. That's for sure. But that doesn't mean that this goes against globalization, because sometimes trading with your partners and your neighbors is a way to be better inserted in the global value chains. So my views on that are a bit different. However, I think I agree that the Mediterranean has a great opportunity now, and that Europe must seek this opportunity, and it would be mutually beneficial for Europe to reduce the dependence, especially for high technology intermediate inputs from China, Asia in general, but particularly China, and look much more at Mediterranean countries and the potential that they offer. And it's not just because they are nearby and we are going to pollute less when we import from Egypt, rather than bringing everything from China, getting stuck in the Suez Canal when there is a problem, having to go towards South Africa and multiplying by 4 the cost of transport. It's not only that, it's that also there is a good knowledge of markets, of consumers, movement of people and capital between Europe and the Mediterranean that we must continue promoting and exploiting. And on this topic, in the center that I was privileged to lead in the last years, we did a specific study to see what are the industries and the sectors which offer a comparative advantage, which could increase production and exports towards Europe, goods that Europe already imports from China. And we came up with a few sectors, and I have the details. So it was a very, very detailed study that was done with Professor Gassiorek and Patricia Auger from the Aix-Marseille University. We went down the statistics of the Comtrade, and we came up with several 8 groups in Egypt that offer this potential to export much more to the European Union, where the capacity to produce and export already exists, but the percentages are still way too low. And Europe, for some reason, for many reasons, continue to import from China. What are those reasons? Some have to do with the Chinese policy of subsidizing, sending very cheap products, all over the markets in the world, something that we cannot control, but also we can control our own bottlenecks and obstacles. What we can improve is the logistics, the transportation, the rule of law, the judicial security, all this, so that Europe realizes that the potential to produce and export exists in these neighboring countries. So concretely, in the case of Egypt, the groups are 8 initially, and then we go down to 3 products that offer a very, very high comparative advantage. The groups are, the first one is salt and sulfur, the second is fertilizers, the third one is essential oils and perfumes, plastics, glass and glassware, natural cultured pearls, iron and steel, and electrical machinery and equipment. These are the sectors that offer most potential, and where some of the barriers that we were talking about earlier could be removed because the demand from Europe is there. Of course, a lot of this could happen in the context of the trade agreements. And since I have the expert next to me, I won't say more, but I think that it's a missed opportunity, the fact that this negotiations on a deeper trade agreement between the EU and Egypt have been paralyzed since 2013. If we are serious about the new neighborhood policy, and if we are serious about promoting this trade between the EU and Egypt, I think that the trade agreements have a very important role to play. And if the agreements are not the best vehicle, maybe we can discuss other types of investment agreements that also include the trade provisions. But I think this is something that needs to be revamped and reviewed, because the potential is there. And Egypt, on the other side, it needs to also do its homework. And when I look at other sectors, for example, textile, automotive, chemicals, agribusiness, one factor that struck me was the large presence of government institutions everywhere, refineries, fiber and yarns in the textile, it's everywhere. And it's okay, SOEs are fine, but sometimes when they prevent the private sector, 100% private sector to emerge, they could constitute a disincentive for the expansion of economic activity. So I think that the divestment program I was mentioning before is something worth pursuing. Private sector companies should feel like they are in a level playing field, and there should be more transparency. The regulators should not also be the operators. I have a big admiration for a very famous fiscal economist, Vito Tanzi, who is now close to 90, but he says, you give to the government more than 30% of GDP, you run into inefficiencies. So the role of the government doesn't always have to be produce, export, do everything. It has to be to promote the role of private companies and support them with regulations, with good laws, with security, but for an economy to take off and really have sustained positive rates of GDP per capita growth, this equilibrium between the private and the public sector is essential. And for that, I think that the role of the government must be there, but must not do everything.
Dr. Mack, you said 8 sectors and 3 products. What are the 3 products?
The 3 at the end, if you go down.
I'm concentrating.
Yeah, you refine more, you go to 3, which are metals, fertilizers, both mineral and chemical, and the third one is plastics, propylene, and other olefin polymers.
It's better send us a copy.
Exactly.
Dr. has it, but I'm very happy. Okay. And my dear friend Tarek also has it, but I'll be happy to send it to everybody.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Thank you, Dr. Blanca. Nicolaus, again, if we can go down, look at policy horizons, more on the ground, the programs you guys have, again, closer to the ground, what is making you optimistic or keeping you up at night?
Well, first of all, let me say on the points made, I have 3 or 4 comments before coming to the question. The first one is, as I said before, clarity of policy is very important. I was particularly interested in the latest business barometer that a lot of the Egyptian companies raise as a concern the lack of clarity on future economic policy. And that's really a key, because if you don't know which direction the boat is going, it's very difficult to take decisions. But this applies also to investors. If investors don't know where the country is going, it's difficult for them to decide between one or the other country. So clarity on sectors, and in this we very much support the government and its state ownership policy and the divestment process that Blanca mentioned. And the more clarity they can inject into this policy, the better it will be also, so that we know in which sectors investors are welcome and what are the conditions of competition. The second is that, of course, we talk about the business environment and facilitating it, but there is one element that it is really generally, in my experience, focused to very big companies. When we have discussions, with Egyptian government, they always refer to the big names. They want to see the big companies coming, and there's not so much attention placed on SMEs. Now, SMEs is the backbone of the European economy. Over 97% of companies in Europe are SMEs, and are these companies that create the clusters, the industrial clusters that help feed in and help the big names, the big companies, that are famous, worldwide. So, SMEs should also be welcome, and to attract SMEs who don't have don't have an army of lawyers or accountants to be able to translate, to try to understand the labyrinth of the legislation and of the incentives. It has to be made simple in English, on one website, information, and then as a second step, also eliminate steps. If there's 20 steps that need to be taken for, land allocation, you have to think, do we really need 20 steps? Can we do it in 5 steps? And it's the same with customs clearance, the same with import licensing. So more emphasis on SMEs, more transparency. The third element, we talk about, legal certainty, modernization of the association agreement. That was something actually raised by President Sisi in his discussions with our president, was raised by the Prime Minister when he met with our Executive Vice Minister Dombrovskis. So we are going to look into, the technical aspects, and, I will be seeing some of you as well in this room, to get ideas, because we really need to understand what Egyptian business also wants, because it's not only for the Europeans to decide, I want to do this in that country. We need also to see, what Egyptian business wants and how we can strengthen the cooperation with European businesses. So it's a two-way street, not a one-way street. And in terms of, in this respect, as I said, investment facilitation is very important. How do you facilitate investment? And there is a new tool that has been developed now in the European Union, very new. It's called an agreement on sustainable investment facilitation. So it's not just investment, but sustainable investment facilitation. And we believe when we invest abroad, this investment should be good for the environment, should be good for the country that's hosting us, should be in respect of labor laws, of social rights, and of the environmental situation. So this is a new model, and it's about facilitation. We can call it 101 rules on how to invest. So simple things like to agree on if an investor has a problem, whom does he talk to? Where can he find the legislation? What are the steps to get licenses? So, basic things that, as I said, Gafi is working on. But, if we enter into an agreement, an engagement with Egypt, this will send a powerful message to European investors. There's an agreed rules, on investment facilitation. And this model, we have agreed this year, it entered into force with Angola. So we proposed this to Angola. I was involved. Before coming here, we had 2 negotiating rounds, and Angola says, yes, I want this, I like this, I take it. So, and now there's a number of other countries interested, like, Nigeria, Kenya, and of course, in Northern Africa. Personally, I want to put Egypt first, and make sure that, we conclude something. And this is one of the issues that the minister will be discussing in Brussels. Lastly, on sectors, we haven't done a sectoral analysis as detailed, but I'll give you one example. In the investment conference, we signed a number of deals. They were about 40 or 45 deals, up to 60 billion euros of commitments. The vast majority of these deals and commitments were in the energy sector. So Egypt is becoming really a player in the energy market. It can become a hub. It has a huge comparative advantage. At least that's the way we see it. And already there is a lot of interest from European companies to invest in the production, first of renewables, then of green hydrogen, and as I am Greek, I have to say in these deals, companies, SMEs, there was an SME from Greek-German SME that signed a deal for 10 billion euros, to produce in Alexandria, to invest in a plant to produce renewables, and from this plant to produce green hydrogen, and also that shipping and the off-taking is being arranged. So energy is important. It's important for Europe because, as you know, the developments, energy security is vital, especially in the light of developments of the war in Europe. And also is part of the green transformation of the European economy. We have a vast program called the Green Deal. It's not, originally people thought it was about climate change and the environment, which it is, but actually, to be frank, it's an economic program. It's transforming the whole economy to move, and work with new principles, in terms of energy. And it's a huge, there will be a lot of attention paid now with the second administration of President von der Leyen, and Egypt is so well placed to take advantage of it. And I have to say, we are here, we should exploit the momentum. Now, the European attention is on Egypt. So Egypt should really exploit. There's other countries in the region, there's competition for that. Egypt is not alone, but I think you're very well placed. As a last comment, today as we speak, there is a GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, European Union Summit. And those countries also want to enter into the European market with energy products. But personally, I think Egypt has a comparative advantage, but one needs to move fast.
Excellent. Thank you, Nikolaos. Very Very insightful comments. Mohammed Bey, since you're the other Egyptian on the panel and Minister Hassan is not here, can you tell us why the Egyptian government isn't divesting its assets?
Yep. Before I do that, I have to say I'm a little disappointed from Blanca because the textile is not one of the three sectors you mentioned. And I have to disagree with you. Otherwise, I will find another job. So I think that what you mentioned is very important. And I think at one point in time, Abla mentioned this study for me. So we'll really look into it seriously. I think it's very important to see what we can do. We have a lot of issues, and this panel and the previous panels alluded to it. The fact that the government is present in the economy more than enough is really a problem. And we don't see the end of that, at least, and we don't know when, despite the announced policies. But having mentioned that, we should not just sit still. At Egyptian Exporters Association, we looked at the target the government gave us to achieve to increase our exports from $36 billion non-oil exports to $145 billion. So when we looked at what we are producing, industrial and agriculture and mining and this and that, so we realized that this target of $145 billion is not achievable because we don't have enough production. So we really thought of what to do. So we came up with an initiative, we call it Invest for Exports. We discussed this with Gafi, and we had a memorandum of understanding, and we started really looking to invite investment that are dedicated to exports. Obviously, what we were talking about, the re-engineering of the global value chain, helps very much in this. Because we see now a lot of interest in investment in Egypt. It's not only from Europe, it's from Europe, from China, from even India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, from Vietnam, you name it. Everybody has a potential, see a potential in Egypt to invest for exports. But we still have a major issue, a major obstacle here, which lack of industrial parks, lack of industrial land. And the more difficult that we need to overcome, not only allocating the land, but providing the land with utilities. So we came up with another initiative. We called it the Green Corridor for Industrial Parks. We presented this initiative to the government and the new government. They were very happy with it, but we are yet to see a serious movement to make it happen. So with those two initiatives that we, as the first initiative, Invest for Exports, we did it jointly with Gafi. And we are providing a lot of support now for investors that want to come to invest in Egypt with a view to exports, not to take advantage of the 100 million consumer in the market. The other initiative, we proposed it together with the Federation of, is this something for me?
No.
Okay. I thought I said something wrong.
No, somebody's trying to enter the Zoom call.
Is anybody listening to what I'm saying? Okay, so the other initiative, the Green Corridor for Industrial Parks, is really presented to the government as an initiative between Expo-Link and the Federation of Egyptian Industries. And obviously, it was just a concept paper, but there to flesh it up, it takes a lot of work. And that work has to be jointly between us and the government. The third initiative, really, that I'm very happy with what Nikolaos said, Commissioner for the Mediterranean, Suika, you mentioned. What's his nationality? It's a lady. Oh, great, even better. I think we had a good initiative and cooperation with the EU when we signed the association agreement called the Industrial Modernization Program. And I think we need another one. We call it greening the industry. Instead of upgrading the industry, we need now your support to green the industry. Particularly that your trade policy and what you invented in the EU, the CPAM. The CPAM is a non-tariff trade barrier, basically, using the environment and the carbon and emission and all the good causes to hinder the exports of the global South. So we need, as an association, we have an association. You said we alleviated the relationship to a strategic partnership now between the EU and Egypt. I think it is time to adopt a new program for greening the industry. I mentioned this to Ambassador Roger Berger a while ago, and I mentioned it to the government, but I think we need to take it more seriously, and I'll be happy to discuss with you this, Nikolaos, at a later stage. So those three initiatives, if we put them together, I think they can make a big difference, because without investment, we will not have production. And without industrial parks that are sustainable and green, we will not have the production or the investment to produce something to export. And without greening the industry, we will always face a problem. So those three initiatives compound, I think it can make a difference in the future. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Esem. I know I'm the moderator, I should make comments, but I can't save myself from making a few comments. So I'm an optimist by nature. And I think on the divestment of the state-owned enterprises, I think the government released a document, which is fantastic. The ECS actually wrote a few pieces reviewing the document. And I think also ECS is committed to follow up and publish again, follow up on how this document is performed, because there is a plan, which is great. Yeah, the fact is there is a document out there in the open that has a roadmap. It is imperfect, but it's out there. So there is something, there's a reference point where we can all have a policy dialogue and say, are we doing, right? What is our percentage of achievement of these commitments that have been set out by the government that have not been canceled yet? And so that's one. I think the other thing I think that's quite important, that I say this from a practitioner in the industry. I think, so I've been working for 30 years now, and we went through various economic cycle. Maybe this one's slightly different, but again, if there's one thing that binds economic policy in Egypt, is generally it is more reactive than it is proactive. So again, so the environment shapes the policy doesn't shape the environment. The good news is, with the current savings rates, with the current unemployment, so we have about 1 million people that are going to the job market every year that need investments to create jobs, right? And we have very low saving rates. So the fact is we need private investment, and we're running this huge budget deficit. And again, I think we realize that just printing our way out of our problems is not a great strategy, and just leading with government spending. So I think, again, we have a situation whereby, again, the reality will shape the policy. And that's the optimist in me speaking. The question is, would I put my money where my mouth is? We are, but I think anybody that goes long on Egypt, I always say, if you go long, you can't go wrong in Egypt, right? But if you try to optimize for the short to medium term, the short to medium term is generally quite messy. But I think if we take the long view, I think there is a lot of opportunity in Egypt, whether economic returns to be made and or, again, I think value to be extracted. Obviously, Europe committing to Egypt's youth, I think also helps European security, not only economic security, but also social security. The last bit is, I'll give an example about one of our companies, and it'll answer the question that you have on what do Egyptians want from the EU. So we have a company that exports seeds and herbs. So it's close to the essential oils, Blanca. And this company has been growing. It's the largest exporter of culinary seeds and herbs out of Egypt. It's grown 60% since last year in dollars. So we're doing pretty well. And actually, the motto of this company is being your favorite European supplier out of the continent. So it's this idea about how do you provide what a European supplier provides in terms of offering quality service communication, right? So not just be sort of the low-cost producer. So not fall into the trap of we're going to be the low-cost producer and the Europeans have to correct for whatever we do, or the customers have to correct for whatever we do. How do we increase the standard of how we produce and how we service our product to be perceived as a of-the-continent European supplier? Having said this, accessing Europe, for example, in an industry like this, the regulations are horrendous and there's no central body of regulation. So, for example, why can there not be a central body that audits the factory and just says this factory is green listed, and everybody just subscribes to that? For every single customer I need to ship to in Europe, they need to come and audit, right? They need to come and audit the product. So every single customer has to audit the factory, audit the products and so on. And it's an extremely redundant process to qualify. So if we want to expedite the flow of, if we want to expedite nearshoring, we need to make access to market for credible suppliers, right? So find the system of whitelists, find the system of something that actually expedites access to qualified suppliers. And then this access needs to be obviously conditional on performance and it can be revoked at any point in time. But something like this would phenomenally expedite, I think, access of serious suppliers. And that obviously also serious suppliers have the ability to scale a lot faster than other suppliers. So I think that's just a thought to share. And at that point, I'm going to open it up for the...
If you allow me, Ala, and I just, the issue of auditing. In the textile sector, we trying to resolve this issue. We are about to resolve it by consolidating.
Right. BRC.
So somebody independent third party will do the auditing and everybody accepts it. So that will relieve you from too many visits and too many audits.
Right. But if you have a formal entity that does this, and BRC, when BRC was developed, when I was doing textile back in the day, right? So BRC was adopted more widely because it was pushed by the government. So you need sort of that governmental support to push, whether a governmental or a quasi-governmental body, but somebody say, you know what, if they're approved according to this standard, خلاص, we're good to go. صح. Dr. Bshay, تفضل. We take questions and then we take comments. Okay.
I'm professor of economics, but I want to tell you something very fitting. First of all, a professor at Harvard 35 years ago said, predictability and consistency of government policy is important for what you have been talking about. And this has to be available to be found. Next, I'll tell you about an experience about export. 40 years ago, I got seeds from Italy when I was working in Italy for the World Food Conference and all these things of asparagus for less than $1. I grew them in Dahshur in my farm. And after a year or so, it grew very well and it was growing well. Then an American lady who's a friend of my wife got her a book after 3 years on asparagus. The first page of that book read as follows: Egypt is the ancient home of asparagus. The pharaohs grew it to cure venereal diseases, etc., etc., etc. Now, no one knew about asparagus in those days. But asparagus, as you know, to make a very long story short, asparagus is a very expensive commodity at the world level. I can predict that you don't need to hire someone to look at the market for it. For the next 100 years, I guarantee, and I will sign, Egypt will find a market for it, and Europe is the ideal market for it. 4 hours from now, flying, you send the asparagus in Germany, and they would pay anything for it. It's a very expensive commodity. And it grows. Egypt has 6 rates of land: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It can grow in land 4 or 5, which means it's not very wonderful. And an asparagus bed remains for 100 years or so. You get it out every year at the end of February, and you can export it by aeroplane to Germany, all Europe, and so on. Europe will be a fantastic market ad infinitum, really, for it, and it sells wonderful, and they would pay anything for it, and the price for it is very high. And let us work a little bit on agriculture, and I don't need the government for anything, just to allow me to export it. Not me, I mean, not at my age, but I'm doing it for the young people. It will be super business for Egypt and will be something. And when I gave a lecture in the Ministry of Agriculture 24 years ago, they told me, but Dr. Adil, no one knows asparagus here. I said, thank God that you don't know him. Usually you have been used to eating the thing and exporting the remainder. Because I'm familiar with, Egyptian. Okay, we ate a lot of rice, but we were the biggest exporters of rice until very recently in the Near East for 1.2 million dollars we get for, tons of rice we get. So
that's a very good point.
I am now giving something for the young, an idea.
Yes.
I will sign for them. They will be only gainers, but let the government leave them to export or tell them the rules, and Egypt will flourish. And it is agriculture for export without anything. You don't need all these industrial things and so on. So let us pay some attention to agriculture. Once upon a time, we were so wonderful in extra long staple cotton, about which I can talk for days and days.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boucher. Very excellent point. Any other questions or comments from the floor? Someone here.
Thank you very much for the good quality of the presentation.
Can you introduce yourself very briefly? Introduce yourself very briefly.
Dr. Mohammed Lamin Dawi. I was former director of investment and technology in UNIDO in Vienna. And I'm currently working as an expert for the French Development Agency. So my question is in relation with untapped export opportunity. So we discussed it, and I understand why a lot of the untapped export opportunity between Egypt and the European market. I think that there is more untapped export opportunities between Egypt and Africa. When you export for Europe, this means that you comply with the international standard. So when we know that the intra-trade between the African countries is less than 15%, so we can say that there is a lot of opportunities for the Egyptian industry, mainly to export their Africa. Manufacturing is a very big sector where there is a lot of opportunities. And as you know, the majority of the African countries, they are importing 70, 80% of their industrial product from Europe, from the USA, from Japan, from China, etc., and not from the other African development countries. There is a big opportunity, and I let's say, suggest to the industries and mainly to Mr. Mohammed Qasim, who talked about textile, there is a lot of opportunities in Africa. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions or comments, please?
I'm a very small exporter of artisanal products. And when I hear about opportunities to access the European markets, I was like, wow, oh, that's amazing. But how can I access it? How can I, like the Export Council in Egypt and the Handicraft Chamber are not like something to rely on. So I was wondering how we can access those opportunities and how we can access it even through bigger companies, and what we can do to, like you mentioned, glassware and essential oils, and these are some things we can work on. So I was wondering how we can access those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Very good. So, Niklaus, I think you wanted to make a comment first before we get to the questions. You had a follow-up reaction?
Yes, thank you. A couple of comments on what my co-panelists said, and then maybe a couple of the answers. First on just to address the issue of the CBAM. The CBAM indeed is a policy that we have taken. It's for those of you who are not familiar, CBAM is a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which means that certain products, these 5 well-defined products, will have to green their production and then enter the EU. Otherwise, they will have to pay a CBAM certificate fee. Now, this was done in order to help address climate change. And I have to say, the first ones who complained about it was European producers, because the obligation so far is only on European producers. They have to do it. If they don't do it, then they have to pay these fees. So it is a way of, making sure that there's a level playing field between our producers and international producers. Now, it's not true that's protectionism for one very simple reason. For these 5 products, we are net importers of these products. So we need to import them. So the question will be not whether or not we'll import them, because we need them, is from whom are we going to buy it? So those who are green will get the benefit. They have the comparative advantage. And that's why I'm saying Egypt is in a very good place because of renewables and the production of renewables. And I think that in the future, they will take over, perhaps market share from a lot of other suppliers into the EU. So I think CBAM is actually more of an opportunity rather than a challenge, even though it sounds complicated and difficult. On my second comment was, and you mentioned, the auditing. It's true that the real problems, as I said, are behind the borders. That was my point when I said that our agreement is very old. It deals with tariffs. The problem is not paying tariffs into the EU because there are no tariffs. It's what happens afterwards. And in terms of agri-food products, I will admit it, we have a very strict legislation. We have very high standards. And that's because historically there's been a lot of food scare stories in the EU. And now there is zero tolerance in terms of consumer protection. The good aspect is if one, however, meets these standards, then they can export to anywhere in the world. They're accepted as, as a certificate of guarantee. And we will be doing more. There is now a policy in the EU to link production to consumption. So we call it from farm to fork, which means look at the whole production of a product until its consumption by the final consumer, and it must be sustainable. And this will be translating into, in the future, also, for example, labeling, information provided on the calories, on the content of the product. So those who move fast in sustainability, again, they will be, getting an advantage over others. So this is coming. It's coming in Europe. And as I said, European farmers are not also so happy about it, but they will have to comply. But the aim is to create a sustainable, especially because of the food security issues, that the world has, sustainable chain from production to final consumption. And a point I wanted to make on, textiles. I couldn't because, I owe you one comment on textiles. And this has to do a lot with what I see here as the level playing field. And how is it linked? Textiles is a very good industry because it's at the middle level. It can provide basic skills to workers. You can take no skills or low skills and give them skills. So it's a very good industry to develop. And I have personally experience. Before coming to Egypt, I worked a lot with Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a 200 million country, which had, it was actually a least developed country, an LDC. And they started exporting textiles, in 2021. They were exporting about 900 million euros of textiles to us. And you know what is the number today after 24 years? You'd be impressed. It's over 20 billion of euros of exports. And why did this happen? Because, they had a special program. They did not have an association agreement. Actually, they're asking for an association agreement right now. They're knocking at our door and say, please, can we have an FTA with Europe? The trick was that the government listened to the private sector. And that's very important And that's something that, I think Blanca mentioned. They went to the private sector and they said, we want to develop the textiles industry, a cluster. What do you need from us? How can we shape regulations so that we help you export to the EU? And it happened. So there needs to be thorough consultation of the private sector in Egypt also on all these measures and reforms that are being taken, because they have to work in favor of the private sector. And I'm saying this because I'm saying also out of self-interest. If the situation improves for Egyptian investors and Egyptian companies, automatically improves also for European investors and companies. So it's not one or the other. If the sea level rises, all boats go up, as they say. So that's a really important part. On one aspect, on gentlemen from UNIDO, I have to say that we work very well with UNIDO. Right now, we have a program. And this, again, as I said, in the absence of a more deep agreement, it's still a program in the sort of donor-recipient relationship. It's a specific program with the Minister of Trade and Industry. Now it's Investment and Trade, to do two things. The first thing is to help improve the quality infrastructure. So all these organizations, the labs that verify and accredit and certify Egyptian products, to raise them to international standards so they can properly do their work. And in that case, if it works, there will be less auditing, because then there will be, certificates, acceptable at international level. And the second one is to help SMEs. We are selecting clusters. I have to say, one is in the textiles cluster, others in the agri-food, in certain governorates in Egypt, to help them to see what is the capacity building they need in order to be able to export to the EU. So do they need to develop new products? Do they need to improve the current products? And this is an ongoing program as we speak. We call it Tigara, which means trade. And with the help of UNIDO, actually, in the Ministry of Industry now, because industry moved to separate itself from trade. And lastly, something that I ought to have said before, because Minister Rani Al-Mashat mentioned it at the very beginning, that we are in discussions with the Egyptian government to give what we call macroeconomic financial assistance. This is part of the package that was mentioned before of 7.4 billion. 5 billion are macroeconomic financial assistance, which means giving this loan at concessional rates to the Egyptian government. And it is linked to what we call targets. So we are agreeing with the Ministry of Economic Planning and International Development on certain targets, which go back to the reforms that the government itself is doing. So it's a way complementing the effort, is actually providing a further carrot to do these reforms, which are already in the books, and we hope to see them materialize very soon.
Thank you, Nicolaus. And we have a question. We have Dr. Mahmoud Mohiddin with us online. Dr. Mahmoud, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you well. And thank you so much for giving me a chance. I know that I'm going to speak in the next session. Can you hear me well?
Very well.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, just a quick reflection on the CBAM, and I will not speak for long because I don't like to take that from the next session that I'm going to speak at. But CBAM is a very controversial measure when it is coming from the perspective of the countries of the global south. I wish we can really share the European view in every element of it. That was a kind of a unilateral measure. It had good reasons, as mentioned, dealing with the climate action. Definitely, it will have major spillovers. But what can we do about it? It's a fact of life. It's going to be implemented in a few months in 2026. It's not just the EU. The UK has its own CBAM. In the States where I'm speaking to you from now, they are going to have something similar to the CBAM. And I would say we need to take a few actions. I'll be very transparent on my advice here. First thing, you need to approach, if your company is impacted, you need to approach your Minister of Trade and Industry And I'm speaking generally, of course, with all due respect to His Excellency Mr. Hassan Khatib. So the company to prepare a file, coordinate with the Ministry of Trade and Industry to see what they can do with the WTO. Good luck with that. They will not respond before a few years because they need to see the harm and the evidence of the harm. The second line of action is through the partnership agreement. See if there is some sort of flexibility, arrangements within the partnership agreement that the country impacted could have an opportunity, including access to technical assistance and concessional finance. Don't give up on that. It's hard, but somebody needs to do that kind of work. The third, for the company impacted, the companies I spoke to, including fertilizers and steel, they have their own decarbonization plan, but that is not for tomorrow. That is for 10 years down the road. So in this case, they need to restructure fast. They need to decarbonize fast. Technology is available. Finance is not necessarily available, but that needs as well some good partnership with the EU and its banks like the EIB, EBRD, and others. The fourth line of action is develop the carbon credit market. Attempts are being made, including in Africa, in what's called the African Carbon Market Initiative, or with Egypt in its new regulated or semi-regulated carbon credit market. And if the certificates are going to be accepted by the EU, that would be great. If not, bad luck. You need really then to go and buy from the ETS, which is super expensive. The other thing that you can do is do the Indian way of dealing with this matter. But this needs trust that the Minister Kojuk and his team, they need to tax you or put a customs duty on your exports and get that to be paid back to you as an exporter and put that under settlement or arrangements with them. And the final line is basically to pay the dues. And comes January 26. So it's tough. And here there is an issue about the leveling of the playing field. What can we do? Leveling the playing field. So for Egypt, for instance, and its brothers and sisters of the Global South, they need really to consider to have their own CBAM. It's not tit for tat, but if there's a world post-CBAM, it shouldn't be a kind of an EU privilege. This needs really to be with adequate reciprocation of actions without really harming the good trade relations. This is the new world that we're living in, but we cannot really get something like the CBAM and present it well as the best thing that happened since slide bread. No, it's not. It will have major spillovers in and negative ones. Eventually, in the midterm, long term, it could be great if it's going to be helping the companies restructure faster than they plan. But I cannot really undermine the impact in the short term, midterm, in absence of concessional finance, in absence of technical assistance. And I can go and tell my Egyptian or African folks, this is great news for you. It's tough. IRA is the other thing, but that is another thing about leveling the playing field. The EU did what they could. The EU is normally good in taxing and putting levies. The Americans are better in providing subsidies, and they are providing substantive subsidies under the form of IRA that will make every company and every firm producing something similar to what the IRA is producing in a very disadvantaged position. So this is the new world that we're living in. And that could be a segue because you cannot really talk about debt and vulnerability in a vacuum. It's happening because of all of these matters happening with suboptimal cooperation and suboptimal coordination. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. Very, very valuable intervention, I think, with very clear recommendations. Dr. Blanca, can I ask you for closing remarks, reflections and closing remarks?
Yes, I'll try to be brief, but I want to make 4 quick points.
Please.
One is that I want to mirror the trade relations with the geopolitical trade-offs that were discussed in the previous session. I think that Egypt has a great opportunity on trade, the same way it has a great opportunity geopolitically being part of the new BRICS, where Egypt is going to be able to influence the world also through relationships with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, who are now part of the new BRICS. I think on trade is the same because Egypt has signed the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. also is in negotiations with the EU for obvious reasons. There is a potential market there too, and also the proximity to the Gulf countries. So Egypt is in a privileged position to become a trade hub using all these different trade measures, provided that some of the tariff and non-tariff barriers are properly eliminated. My second point is on the job creation. I heard somebody saying that we have to, attract FDI and make sure there is an appropriate business environment to create jobs. But also we have to give the youth the opportunity to create jobs themselves. And for that, we need to simplify the regulations and the taxes for small and medium-sized enterprises, and also adapt the curriculum in universities to the needs of the labor market. And this is not specific to Egypt. It's happening worldwide because the technology is advancing very quickly and the labor market is demanding a lot of skills that we didn't study when we were at university a few years ago. So that is another point. My third point is on textiles. Yes, the comparative advantage is there, but in another study by the IFC, it's indicated the predominance of the public sector, the fact that there are still many tariff and non-tariff barriers, and the need to more sophisticated skills, including updating the curriculum to move up into higher value-added activities. If I had more time, I will give you the example of Inditex, because I'm from Spain, and that's the textile sector, but maybe we can discuss that with coffee. And then the last point is, please allow me to build on the recent Nobel Prizes that insisted on the quality of institutions and the broader concept of the wealth of nations. To see where a country is going, in addition to GDP per capita growth, we need to look at three other assets: the quality of institutions, rule of law, governance. Second is the human capital that you accumulate through education and adapting the education to the labor market. And the third one is how you manage your natural resources. And Egypt has the natural resources. There is a huge opportunity to diversify the energy sources of renewables. And I just want you to keep those three concepts in mind moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Asim, closing comments?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'll start with the issue that of the CBAM. Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin explained the implications, the negative implication of that program on Egypt and the other global South countries. We have actually, before you came on, Dr. Mahmoud, I proposed something that could be present a mitigation of the negative impact of the CBAM legislation in EU, which is create a fund to green the industry, similar to the fund that to modernize the industry, the IMSE, and now we can say IG, industrial greening program. I think this is a proposal that I have made as a Federation of Egyptian Industry and as Egyptian Exporters Association a few times. But our government did not jump on it, and the EU gave us the deaf ear. So we need to talk about this. The other point that I want to raise, which is the Bangladesh experience. My friend Nicolaus had mentioned. Luckily, the Bangladesh government listened to the private sector. They might also listen to the Egyptian private sector, but to listen here is very difficult. But the issue actually is not only that. The Bangladesh opened when I was appointed in our embassy in Washington in 70, I think it was 85, I'm sorry, 1985. Bangladesh used to export at that time $300 million worth of apparel to the United States. Egypt exports was less than 1 million. And we have cotton, we have mahalla, we have talat harb, we have everything that you can talk about. However, we were very minute compared to Bangladesh. That did not have anything except, labor. And Korean investment. Korean investment is what made Bangladesh. As a matter of fact, Korean investment made Bangladesh, made Vietnam, and now in the process of making Uzbekistan. And I was in Uzbekistan in a couple of weeks, and I saw what they are making there. And I introduced the guy who's making all this, the Korean guy, to our ex-minister of investment, but there was no follow-up. But I think the key now is to attract the investment. I just want to comment also on the IFC point, which I don't know where the IFC came with this issue. The public sector, the state-owned companies are only in the upstream. But the downstream, the garment making, the house, the home textile is 99.9% in the hands of the private sector. So why the IFC is obsessed with this issue? I have had this discussion with the IFC for years, but they hired someone from England who wrote a report. And the recommendation that he said, don't help IFC, don't help the private sector in textile in Egypt because of the government intervention. I think he was wrong. But the IFC got fixated on that. The guy passed away, by the way, but his recommendation is still available. Another point is some of the floor here mentioned that they want to export and they don't know how. If anyone wants a recommendation or advice on this, please contact Engineer Ahmed Taha, as the Managing Director of Egyptian Exporters Association. And we do that as part of the core business of our job. I think I covered all what I wanted to say. The only thing, I have a proposal for you, Nikolaos, regarding what we call is audit fatigue. I think the EU would do a great favor to the global South if you're associated. How we solve this issue? Do we solve this issue by convincing our buyers to get together and choose an entity to do the audit only once, and everybody accepts it? Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, Macy's, Costco, everybody is accepting Better Work audit. So we get audited by Better Work, and that applies to everybody. So if there is an association for imports of the seeds and whatever, I think this association can appoint a third party to do the audit, and that kills the issue of audit fatigue.
And
we can apply this to all other industries. The association of importers can appoint someone and then unify the auditing mechanism, and then we solve it. And I'll stop here because I see
we're flashing red.
Our time is over.
We're 2 minutes over time. So thank you all. Thank you to our dear panelists. Thank you to the audience. Very much appreciate your patience.